Bob Fine, the Executive Director of the American Nuclear Society, and I'm pleased to be here to present the members of the American Nuclear Society President's Special Committee on Fukushima, who will discuss the report they have prepared for the Society. The American Nuclear Society, with nearly 12,000 members, is the world's largest professional society devoted to nuclear science, technology, and policy. Our members come from diverse backgrounds: academia and educational institutions, medical and research facilities, government agencies, and laboratories, and the nuclear energy industry, to name a few. First, I would like to introduce our two co-chairs, Dr. Dale Klein and Dr. Michael Corradini. As many of you know, Dr. Dale Klein is a distinguished professor of engineering, served as chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and currently serves as Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of Texas System. Dr. Klein is also a fellow of the American Nuclear Society and the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Dr. Michael Corradini is the president-elect of the American Nuclear Society and is a distinguished professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He also is the director of the Wisconsin Institute of Nuclear Systems and serves as a professor of mechanical and nuclear engineering. Dr. Corradini also serves on the NRC's Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards. At this time, I'd also like to introduce two additional key committee members. Mr. Paul Dickman is a senior policy fellow with Argonne National Laboratory and served as study director for the report and chairman of the subcommittee on risk communication. And Dr. Jacopo Buongiorno, who chaired the subcommittee on regulatory issues and is an associate professor of nuclear science and engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Our two co-chairs will make short presentations about individual aspects of the report, a copy of which is in the press kits made available to you this morning. We anticipate that their presentations will take about 30 minutes, after which they will take questions for another 30 minutes. They will be available after this conference concludes for one-on-one discussions. And now, I'd like to present Dr. Dale Klein.
Well, thank you, Bob. First, let me add my thanks for your coming today, and on behalf of the entire membership of the American Nuclear Society. I'd like to extend our support to our many colleagues in Japan, to thank them for their dedication, and to express our hope that they will work quickly to allow the evacuees to move back into their homes around Fukushima. 1 year ago today, natural events unprecedented in recorded history devastated the island nation of Japan. Much of the human tragedy in Japan went largely ignored as the world's attention became focused on the unfolding events at the nuclear power plant at Fukushima Daiichi. The earthquake and resultant tsunami threw the nuclear facility into a scramble for survival. What started as a near disaster quickly evolved into a catastrophe. And the question is why? We still do not know all the facts, but we do know that it was a combination of failures, some mechanical, some human, and some political. As the news of the historic March 11th, 2011 Tohoku earthquake reached the United States, the nuclear community was relieved to hear that the reactors at several locations along the Japanese coast appeared to be undamaged. However, as pictures of the devastation from the subsequent tsunami began to appear, our relief was short-lived. It became clear that the events at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station would mark a significant time in history of nuclear technology and would be a subject of intense scrutiny and study for years to come. But what we also saw was the extraordinary efforts made by brilliant engineers, operators, and technicians who recovered a 6-reactor site from one of the worst natural disasters ever seen. And they did so under the most horrific conditions. Many left behind their desperate families and did not know the fate of friends and loved ones. Through their efforts and the robust design of the technology, we know today that the health impacts from the radioactive materials released and the Fukushima Daiichi accident will probably be too small to measure. Fukushima was no Chernobyl. As the crisis at Fukushima came under control, then ANS President Joe Colvin created the American Nuclear Society Special Committee to investigate and to make recommendations about the events at Fukushima. As nuclear scientists and engineers, and as members of ANS, we knew that we were obligated to preserve and present our collective understanding of the facts and to present them in context, without bias. I'm honored to have been asked to co-chair this distinguished body with my colleague, Dr. Cordini. We were fortunate to have participation of experts from various scientific disciplines and backgrounds, all of whom worked tirelessly on this report, which demonstrates what the American Nuclear Society does best, analyzing data from the perspective of science and engineering without any predisposition. We know that like any form of energy generation, nuclear power is safe, but it is not risk-free. We expect that the findings and recommendations of this report will form the basis of a rational discussion and reflection on what really happened at Fukushima and what, as a result of lessons learned, we can do to continue to rely on and expand nuclear energy as a source of safe and reliable electricity. More importantly, we hope this report will address the misinformation that was spread during the crisis and continues to be perpetuated today. As a professional society, we understand that if people act on misinformation, the crisis not only will be exacerbated, but may also lead to tragic personal outcomes. One of the unfortunate legacies of the Chernobyl accident is the estimated 100,000 to 200,000 elective abortions driven by unwarranted hysteria and fear that consumed Europe and the states of the former Soviet Union in the months following the accident. The information we collected suggests that off-site health consequences of the Fukushima Daiichi radiation releases may ultimately be minimal. No one has died as a result of the radioactive materials released by the Fukushima Daiichi accident, and no health consequences have been reported from health monitoring workers and the public to date. These findings coincide with those of the panel assembled by the Health Physics Society, which presented its findings here on March 1. But I regret to say that we are already seeing false science studies widely reported in the media as to the health effects from the Fukushima accident. Misinformation has consequences, and as a professional society, we have an obligation to not only set the record straight, but to uphold the trust of those who would turn to us for understanding. I would now like to turn the program over to Dr. Mike Cordini, who really did all the hard work on this report, and therefore he gets to have all the hard questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Dale. As Dale noted, the American Nuclear Society is a responsible body for providing clear and dispassionate explanations of matters regarding the nuclear science and technology community. As the leading independent professional society concerning nuclear science and technology, our committee was charged to provide a clear and concise explanation of what happened during the accident, and we were asked to evaluate recommendations based on lessons learned. First and foremost, we have found no aspect of Fukushima Daiichi accident to suggest that the level of safety of nuclear facilities in the U.S. is unacceptable. The current level of oversight is sufficient to protect the health and safety of the American public, and we are in agreement with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission on this point. The overall lessons learned and to be learned chiefly concern a facility's response to extreme natural events, in this specific case, an earthquake and a tsunami. Simply stated, the tsunami design bases for the Fukushima facility were insufficient. The risk-informed regulatory approach we recommend within our study would have identified that insufficiency. Our recommendations in this report are consistent with most of the regulatory issues that have been raised by national and international bodies. Unlike those bodies, however, we focus on the key technical areas as outlined below that would be the basis for any specific set of regulatory actions. These include risk-informed regulation, hazard from extreme natural phenomena, emergency planning, health physics, multiple unit site considerations, hardware design modifications, command and control during a reactor accident, severe accident management guidelines, and societal risk comparisons. Let me just try to work through each of these individually. First, risk-informed regulation. While today's reactors are already designed to consider a wide array of natural phenomena hazards, we must work even harder to plan for unanticipated events. One should use a risk-informed approach in planning for the next level of safety. Thus, where previously we considered vulnerabilities which could lead to beyond design basis accidents on a risk basis, we now conclude that a risk-informed approach should extend to mitigation of the consequences of a severe event as well. We recognize that a risk-informed approach is technically complex and a long-term effort and may lead to a change in the scope of regulatory requirements. Nonetheless, we encourage this careful evaluation of all regulatory changes with input from all stakeholders, including the public, owner-operators, and designers. In terms of hazards from extreme natural phenomena, simply stated, the tsunami design bases for the Fukushima facility were insufficient. The risk-informed regulatory approach we recommend would have identified such inadequacies. Although addressing low-probability events is difficult, it is still important to consider such potential hazards from extreme natural phenomena. We must anticipate and plan for the unexpected with appropriate safety contingencies. The current regulatory approach for some natural phenomena in the United States is deterministic, as opposed to probabilistic, and may work in dealing with the plant's engineering design. However, we have established criteria which go beyond the design for improved safety. As part of our approach, the NRC should periodically reanalyze and, if appropriate, redefine the design and licensing basis for severe natural events, using the latest accepted best estimate methodologies from a consensus of experts. We recognize that the NRC may mandate related improvements based on a cost-benefit analysis, as appropriate. Let's talk about emergency planning. The need for a clear approach to emergency planning in case of a serious accident is recognized in the United States. We believe that emergency planning zones should not be based on arbitrary mileage designations, but rather a comprehensive assessment of the consequences and the likelihood of the various accident scenarios. Again, in short, a risk-informed approach. We do believe that with regard to Fukushima Daiichi, the technical basis for the NRC's decision to issue an evacuation alert for U.S. citizens within 50 miles of the site was puzzling. The NRC's news release that provided the technical basis was based on analyses for radioactive material releases from the reactors, not for spent fuel, which was the initial concern expressed for Fukushima. We believe the technical bases should be clarified to understand better the sources of uncertainty regarding the NRC's decision. The NRC should work together with other agencies, other federal agencies and industry, including the U.S. Department of Energy, which has expertise in the area of emergency planning, and to improve the emergency planning activities using appropriate risk information. Turning to health physics, I would like to stress that we only considered information that is publicly available. These sources focused on radiation exposure, release, and deposition of radioactive materials, and contamination of water and food sources. I have so much I have to make sure I'm on script. 2 internal dose assessment surveys were started by Japan's National Institute of Radiological Sciences and the Japan's Atomic Energy Agency. The UN Scientific Committee on Health Effects of Radiation has also announced that it will conduct a study on health impact of Fukushima residents. TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, has been monitoring emergency workers for external doses throughout the accident and its aftermath. As of the most recent monitoring period, no observable health effects have been reported in any of the workers. The data suggests that off-site health consequences may be minimal, but confirming health effects will take more time. Data collection and analyses continue. As a result, it's too early to make any firm conclusions regarding the health impacts to workers or to members of the public, but it is likely to be minimal. I would also add that many new studies on health effects have been recently released. Dale mentioned, and we wanted to emphasize just last week, the Health Physics Society discussed health effects. Although these were not incorporated in our study. This is an area of ongoing investigation, and we will report on any findings which would change our current views on our website, as well as future updates of this report. Let's talk about multiple unit site considerations. Because site approval takes a lot of time, research, and resources, we recognize that multiple unit siting can be desirable. However, the events at Fukushima have illustrated the importance of multiple unit considerations, and we recommend that a risk assessment associated with multiple units be performed by an appropriate regulatory body when a unit is added to a site. This risk analysis should consider the extent to which multiple units increase or decrease risk. We outline a number of specific factors that should be considered, some of which embrace matters associated with severe accident and many of which focus on operation. In terms of hardware design modifications, we've identified a number of hardware-related modifications which may be considered by near-term regulation. These modifications generally aim at ensuring, for example, higher reliability of the reactor safety systems under severe accident conditions, enhanced reactor instrumentation that would allow the operators to make better informed decisions during emergency operations, more robust delivery of makeup water to the reactor core when safety systems are disabled for whatever reason, and reliable venting of the reactor containment if or when necessary. These modifications will be plant-specific, and an appropriate cost-benefit analysis would ultimately determine which improvements have a real benefit on the safety of each facility. In addition, we do not recommend modifications without a careful analysis to assure that while fixing one problem, another one is not created. In terms of command and control, during an accident, it appears that an unclear chain of command at the Fukushima Daiichi plant exacerbated the accident severity. We believe that the command and control system in the United States, or the command and control structure in the United States, is adequate, but we really recommend a review. The most important point is that necessary accident management decisions must be taken promptly at the proper operational level in order to react swiftly to any accident to minimize any overall consequences. Regarding severe accident management guidelines, we conclude that the industry needs to develop a consensus with the NRC regarding the intent and scope of severe accident management guidelines, sometimes called SAMGs, including the manner in which these interface with specific plant emergency operating procedures. To the extent that these guidelines require information regarding the status of nuclear plants, additional instrumentation, including accident diagnostic tools, may need to be installed into operating plants. Such tools could provide the operator with information regarding the accident's progression, which can then allow operators to identify the most effective strategy for addressing unusual operating conditions. Finally, we recommend that a quantitative assessment of the societal benefits and risks, including indirect costs and externalities related to all energy sources, be performed. I'd call it a renormalization, so to speak. All forms of electricity production are subject to risk, and it's important to assess these comparatively. Some of the factors to consider in these analyses include reliability, continuity of supply, indirect costs to secure supply of the fuel. We continue to support an energy portfolio which is diverse, but which also recognizes the vital importance of a stable and reliable baseload production of electricity. So before we open the floor to questions, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank all the members of the special committee, some of which could be here, some of which are listening on the phone, for their work, and on behalf of the entire committee, we'd also like to make a special note of thanks to the ANS staff who supported our efforts. They were as much a part of making this report a success as any member of the committee, and we sincerely thank them. I'll turn it back to Bob. Where's Bob? Fritz. Oh, to Fritz to end off.
Good morning. I'm Fritz Schneider. We've got an easy 30 minutes for questions, so please take them from the floor. Steve.
Thanks. Stephen Dolly with Platts. You mentioned in the initial presentations that you largely agreed with the NRC's recommendations, the near-term task force, and yet the vote by the Commission this past week that was finalized and the recommendation of the NRC staff was that the improvements they're recommending for the U.S. fleet not be treated as so-called backfits and not be subject to cost-benefit analysis, yet the ANS report appears to be recommending that, in fact, each of these changes should be subject to a cost-benefit analysis. Could you explain why you differ from the Commission and the NRC staff on those points?
I think in all cases, certainly in regulatory space, it's good to do a cost-benefit analysis to find out when you make a change, what benefit are you getting to the public and the environment from those changes. And so I think in most of the regulatory aspects, cost-benefit is a reasonable approach to make. And certainly, at the end of the day, if there's additional cost, the ratepayers might end up having to pick up the tab on those. So it's best in order for the public to really understand what kind of benefits are they getting for what kind of cost that might be achieved. And Mike might want to give some additional comments on that. But
I think you're talking about the three orders. If I want to make sure we're clear. Yeah. The request for information, though, is in some sense is not a cost-benefit issue. So I'd put that aside. The 5054F letters are essentially I'd put aside. The three orders that have been put out, I'll take one as an example, spent fuel pool instrumentation for level, strikes me as something relatively logical, and I don't really see, if I were to do a cost-benefit analysis, I think it would come out to be appropriate. I think so. I think that we might differ on particular points, but I'm not a commissioner, and so I'm not going to presuppose some of their decision-making on what they would choose to do. I do think there's a whole range of potential hardware changes that we had identified, and I think to a large extent those would have to go through some sort of cost-benefit analysis.
Matt.
Matt Wald, New York Times. Dale, you talked about bringing a risk-informed approach to extreme weather hazards, extreme natural hazards, but also that this was the worst natural disaster in recorded history. What's your level of confidence that we can use statistical predictive analytical methods to find the appropriate level of protection against far-out events like enormous earthquakes, or to broaden it a little bit, massive solar storms, or something that you and I may not see again in our lifetimes, but which we may see in the lifetimes of reactors out there, or reactors now being built, but are just so unusual that they fall outside the norm?
Well, Matt, I think in any case like that, what we need to do is look at what we think is a maximal event, put a margin of safety in, and then design accordingly. If you look, for example, at the Fukushima Daiichi site, there were markers that had been placed along that area in the year 869 that had indicated that they had severe tsunamis in the past. And obviously, I don't think, Matt, you or I were around in the year 869, although we feel like it sometimes. It indicates that an occurrence of a major tsunami could be on the order of once every 1,000 years. A risk-informed approach would have told us that. So I think it's very appropriate to look at a case where we do our best understanding of what the maximum natural events might be, and then put a margin of safety, and then design accordingly.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
There are two, or this one, I think they can hear me. There are two recommendations that speak to these questions in the report. The first is we recommend that the design basis for severe natural events be periodically reevaluated based on the latest methodologies and data. Of course, those methodologies and data have to be accepted by the relevant scientific community. And that will give us a more realistic, or shall we say up-to-date design basis. On the other hand, another major lessons learned from the study is that we must plan for the unexpected and the unknown. And this has always been the case, by the way, in designing, operating, and regulating nuclear power plants. We always ask ourselves, what if what if, and it is this this sort of approach has to continue and be expanded. So that's design sufficient flexibility within the system so that you can cope with events that you didn't necessarily expect. I should add that nuclear power plants in the U.S. are in a very good shape in coping with Fukushima-type scenarios as a result of the measures that were taken following the 9/11 events. So there is already quite a bit of work that has been done in that sense.
Other questions from the floor? Hannah.
Hannah with Greenwire. Can you talk a little bit about the 10-mile emergency planning zone that's standard right now, and whether that's adequate in response to this report, or may that be changed? Do those areas need to be expanded? Thanks.
Well, I think if you look at the requirements, currently there is a requirement that there is a 10-mile planning zone, which I think is appropriate. I think more importantly, though, one needs to look at if you actually do an evacuation, it should be based on fact. For example, if the wind is blowing in a certain direction, why would you evacuate in a 10-mile radius versus the areas that have the most significant impact for health consequences? So I think for planning, it's good to have a 10-mile zone. If we go with smaller reactors, that might be a smaller number. So I think it should be based on scientific principles, risk-informed, and then if you ever look at actual implementing an evacuation plan, it should be based on the current weather conditions, events, and what's best for the public, including shelter in place.
Just one clarification. In the United States, two things. First, it's actually a staged evacuation, and so we're looking at a risk-informed approach for the whole complete picture, which is, if you go to the regulations, the NRC advises through the owner-operator, FEMA, and the state, and there's a 10-mile radius right now fixed for essentially airborne effluents, and then a 50-mile radius for ingestion either due to food or water, okay? So that's point one. Point two is because it's a handoff between federal agencies relative outside the site and the owner-operator, what the committee has really tried to do is try to think through that as you're doing this evacuation planning, you want to think about, as Dale said, weather conditions, population, and then be flexible and actually run a number of scenarios so that you don't end with just strictly a mileage designation. So I just wanted to clarify.
Olga.
Hi. Olga Belaglova from National Journal. I was wondering if you could talk about the recommendations from the near-term task force and kind of the pace at which the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been addressing them, and whether 5 years is kind of, that's the deadline that they've set for themselves, but why that might be important or not important, and also whether the NRC should address the patchwork recommendation first, as some have suggested.
In terms of the ANS report, we didn't really get into the details of timelines for which the regulatory actions should occur. We more looked at the science engineering aspects of here are the issues that we think should be addressed. I think the timelines will be determined both by the regulator and the industry. What we tried to do as the ANS committee is look at the facts of scientific and engineering relevance and make a recommendation along those lines, and we did not get into those specifics.
If I might just expand on one point. So let's not talk about this event. Let's talk about TMI, okay? And if you go back to TMI, I personally, this is a personal opinion, I would not want to, and as Dale is saying, he's absolutely right. We're looking at the technical aspects. But I think we don't want to rush to judgment, because in TMI I can identify specific hardware changes that were done that had no effect, were costly, and had to be undone, and actually decrease safety. So a rush to judgment without considering system interactions, the risk of what you choose to do, cost-benefit analysis, has its own risk, okay? And so I think on a personal level, I want to think about it in a staged manner. But as we did, our whole purpose was to identify issues, and since we're not the regulator, nor are we industry, right, let them kind of sort it out, as Dale indicated.
Other questions? Dina, go ahead.
Hi, Dina Cappiello, Associated Press. I was hoping you guys could elaborate a little bit more on your determination about the NRC's 50-mile recommendation in Japan as puzzling. What could have the Commission done differently in terms of coming up with that recommendation?
Well, I'll start and then let Dr. Courtney add. I think it would have been very helpful to understand the technical basis for that recommendation. I still don't know